Hey everyone, my name is Paul and I'm a VCE VET Creative and Digital Media teacher, and today I'll be walking you through my approach to the Section C response to the practical questions in the 2017 VET Creative and Digital Media exam. To access this exam, you can head to the VCAA website and the link will be provided below. You can scan down to the 2017 section here. It provides you PDFs to all the different parts from section A, B and C. So we'll be following along with this particular PDF here, which we can click on. So this is the instructions and the steps that you need to take and the marks allocated to each. But before we get into that, I might just head back to this particular link here, because if you can click on this to obtain instructions in the downloadable examination. If I click here, you can scan down, and depending whether you're using a Windows or a Mac computer, you can download the exam file. Just make sure you read over the instructions above. So I've downloaded the resources and the assets by clicking on this link here, and by doing so, it's given me access to these contents here from blog content.txt, content, CSS images, walking tour, and index.html. We'll be using these files as part of the process, so just make sure that you download these and put them onto your desktop. Before we get started, we'll head back to the VCAA website and we'll click on this link to obtain the instructions for the part 4. So I might pay just to refer back to this link, or download or print the PDF document, so then you can follow along with this demonstration. So if you scan down, it will give you some instructions about the Section C practical task. It's worth 40 marks. You're recommended to spend approximately 60 minutes on this section as a whole, which is divided up into 2 parts, one being the website and one being the animation. So if you move forward, we'll be given the brief for this section, which is about Melbourne walking tours, and we'll have to create a 2-page website to promote walking tours around Melbourne. You've been provided with all the media assets. We've just downloaded those just recently, and you'll use those to complete the task. So if we scan down, we've got a website design guide, and so it really pays to continually refer back to this to make sure that you're on track and you're doing what is required. And this is where we're going to start. So Section C, website, page 1, website, 20 marks. The first step will be to open the supplied index.html file and link the CSS style sheet style.css. So let's get started. So we'll head over to our resources or assets folder and we'll look for the index.html file. We'll right click on this, I'll open with. In this instance, I'll be using the program Adobe Dreamweaver CC, the 2018 version. So I'll click on this. That will open the file as indicated above here in this little tab, index.html. Now before we move forward, it may be worth just taking a little bit of time within the examination just to observe your properties palette and also the additional palettes that are on the right hand side here. Just making sure that everything is there and available to you, so you're not sort of fumbling through things as we move forward. So we have a properties palette down here, which is generally quite useful. If you are missing that properties palette, you can go up to Windows and Properties. There's also some additional features along here in the Insert panel, which we'll perhaps use at a later stage. So the very first step is to link the CSS style sheet, and to do that you go up to Tools, CSS Attach Style Sheet. So we're adding as link, browse, and we'll find the file that they require us to link to. So mine's in this folder here, CSS, style.css, open. Click OK. And in the index.html file, you'll find that now there is a new tab that gives us access to the style.css file. But if you click on split view, it will enable you to not only see the website itself as we're altering it, but if we observe the coding down here inside the head element, we now have this line of code here which links the CSS style sheet to our page. So that's step 1 complete. Step 2 says, using the body tag in the file style.css, modify the website's background color to a hexadecimal code. 6 zeros. Okay, so what we're going to do now is head over to style.css. We're going to be looking for the body tag. So it's this one right here. So body, and it opens. We've got a currently got a font family with Arial sans serif. We're going to add an extra line of code here. So the background color needs to be a certain hexadecimal code. We can write background, and the beauty of using Dreamweaver in this instance, it's going to give us some suggestive sort of, I guess, lines of code. So if we hit to select background, a color picker, we can use this hexadecimal code down here to fill in the remaining lines of code. So we have to close it with a semicolon, make sure that that is closed, and from here we can go up to save all, just to save our progress. And that's a really important step too, just to continually save your progress as you're moving forward in this exam. Step 3 asks you to modify the file style.css to add an H1 tag that is Arial, size 24 pixels, and color a certain hexadecimal code. So what we're going to do to complete that, we're going to go make sure that we're in the style.css file. We're going to add a H1 tag. So to do that, we're just going to create a new line of code because there's not one available to us at this point in time. So we're going to have to make one ourselves. So I'm going to type in H1 and open and give it a few, hit enter a couple of times just to give us a bit of space to work with. And from here, we are going to inside this, we're going to make a font family colon, and we're just going to type in Arial and semicolon to close that. It needs to be a size of 24, so we're going to go font size 24 pixels, and it needs to be a certain color. So you just got to make sure that if you, when typing in color, it is spelled C-O-L-O-R as opposed to C-O-L-O-U-R, colon, and use the hexadecimal code as provided to you on the exam. So we've got now a H1 tag, font family, which is Arial, font size, which is 24 pixels, and a color, that particular hexadecimal code. Just got to make sure that I complete that by using a semicolon. So that's step 3. Step 4 asks you to apply the H1 tag to the heading Melbourne Walking Tours, which is this section here. So at the moment, the H1 tag's not applied. So if I go to the source code, and by working in split view, whether you're in design or live, it will enable you to select the certain elements within the web page. So if I highlight Melbourne Walking Tours, we'll also do the same down here for our in our lines of code. So in this instance here, it's got a div ID or a box which is titled heading. It's got Melbourne Walking Tours, which is yet to have a H1 tag applied to it. So to do that, we're just going to hit an angle bracket, H1, that opens up the tag, and we're going to close it on the other side, /H1. And we're just got to make sure that we don't apply too many of those and make sure that it's just nice and neat across the board. So that's step 4. Step 5, where indicated in index.html, add a slogan of fewer than 12 words to the homepage that is suitable to promote Melbourne Walking Tours. So the section or the slogan that they're referring to is at least, well, it should be placed here. So if I highlight this line of text, it will also highlight the line of code that we actually need to change. So here I'm going to delete this this text and create my own slogan that's fewer than 12 words. So I'll just call it Best Walking Tours in Town. You can see it updating in my website above. So that's step 5. Step 6 asks you to add an H2 tag to style.css and format the slogan as per the style guide provided. So to assist with this, we're going to refer back to the style guide. There are some visuals and some visual examples to refer to, but you can also look back at the text and color guide that's provided. So in this instance, it's giving you some information about the heading 2 or H2 slogan. It needs to be black, Arial, 14 pixels. So we'll head back to Dreamweaver and open up our style.css file. Let's add a new H2 tag, H2, we'll open, hit enter a few times to give us some space to work with. And the first one we're going to do is go font dash family colon, and we'll indicate Arial semicolon to close that. We'll move down to the next line and we're going to go color is black, and we can just type in black. Certain colors can be identified by their name, and I'll hit enter and go to the next line. And this line we're going to go font size colon, and it's 14 pixels or px semicolon. So now that's changed our slogan to look a little bit smaller with Arial font. It's color black and it's 14 pixels. So that's step 6. Step 7 asks you to open the blog content.txt file and add the information to index.html. To do that, I'm going to head over to the assets folder and look for blog content.txt, double click on the file to access the text inside it. And I'm going to highlight that text, hit Command C or Control C to copy the text, head back to Dreamweaver. Now I'm going to look for this section here. It says insert blog text here, and that's where we need to paste it. So if I highlight this line of text, it will highlight where it is in the lines of code. So if I head to my line of code, highlight it here, I can delete it and then hit Command V to paste the text inside it. So that's step 7. So step 8 asks you to use the style sheet to format the text as per the style guide. So to do that, we'll refer back to our style guide, and you can see the visual example. Here the paragraph has been divided up into smaller paragraphs, and if we refer to the text and color guide, you'll see that the paragraph text needs to be black, Arial, and 12 pixels. So we head back to Dreamweaver and we observe this line of code, the paragraph that opens and closes. We need to divide it up into smaller paragraphs, and to do that, what we can do is just hit enter just to help us to sort of, I guess, see where the paragraph should start and finish. This won't impact on your actual website by doing this, but it just makes it easier for us to see where the paragraph elements should open and also close. So here we've got one that opens and we want to close it at the end of globe to match the style guide. So we hit angle brackets /P to close it. We'll do the exact same to this line here, P for paragraph, close it. And as I'm moving forward, you'll see it updating on our site to match that style guide. So open, P, close, P, open, close. 2 more. And because this one's already closed, we just need to open it here. Now that's divided up the section into smaller paragraphs, matches the style guide. Now we just need to style it using the style CSS file. And so to do so, we'll just start a new element P, open it, and we are going to match the style sheet. So it needs to be font family Arial. It needs to be black, so the COLOR, and we can refer to it as black. We don't need to necessarily use a hexadecimal code, and we can also change the font size to 12px for pixels. Complete that with semicolon. Now if we refer to this particular, the changes that are made up here to our style guide, you can see it matches it pretty well. So that's step 8. Step 9 asks you to make the email address into an email hyperlink and save index.html. Just to see what this might look like, you can once again refer to the visual example down the bottom here. There's a link that's provided within this paragraph text. So if we head back to Dreamweaver, we can find that line, melbournetour@gmail.com web address, and we can turn that into an email link. To do so, we can use the properties palette, and if you don't have access to this, you can go up to Windows and just look for the properties function there. So click on that, will give you access to this palette, and with that line of text highlighted, we can type in mail to, and just type in the email address. So Melbourne Tour gmail.com. If we just click off that to initiate the link, it will add the line of code necessary to make this into a working hyperlink as indicated up here. It also asks you to save index.html, and that's a friendly reminder just to save your work on a continual basis, just in case something goes wrong. So we'll go up to File, Save All, and that's step 9. Step 10 asks you to access the images folder, open image1.psd, crop and resize it to 300 by 300 pixels, and then save the image in an appropriate format for inclusion in the website. So to do that, we're going back to our assets folder, open the images folder, open image1.psd, going to right click, open with, in this case, use Adobe Photoshop. And now that we have access to the image, it asks you to crop it. So basically, if it needs to be 300 by 300, it needs to be a square. So I'm going to just head over to the crop, features, and we're going to go 1:1, so it's square. And we can just line it up as per the style guide. So if we refer to the style guide, it's sort of cropped so you can see both of the horses and their faces. And so if we line it up there, we can click accept, and that will crop it. So I'm pretty happy with that. Then we can go up to image size, and just make sure that the width and the height match, and they're both 300 by 300 pixels as indicated on the instructions. So 300 by 300, we can click OK. Now the next step is to save it in an appropriate file format. So to do that, we can go up to File, Export for Web, and this gives us the ability to sort of optimize the graphic so it's appropriate for our website. So if we head over to our presets, it's a JPEG image. We can change it to GIF or PNGs, just depending on what image that you're dealing with, but a JPEG would be suitable for this, keeping in mind that it is a photograph. So a JPEG, and if you need to sort of minimize file sizes, you can tinker with some of these settings here, and that will tell you how it's affecting the final result. So it will be a JPEG file that's 25.96 kilobytes. So with that complete, now we can hit save, and then we just need to access our folder and make sure that we save it in the images folder. So if I find that folder I'm working with, images, and we can call it image 1. We can leave it in that name, or we can rename the file name, but for here I'll call it something perhaps more appropriate to differentiate from some of the other file names. Horses.jpg, save, and that is step number 10. Step 11 asks you to access the contents folder and open the gallery.html page. Add the image to the first section in the gallery where the image tag is and apply an appropriate alt tag text. So to assist with this, we can once again refer back to our visual example, which kind of looks like this. And so if we go back to our assets folder, we can access the gallery.html file inside the contents folder. So if I right click on that, open with Dreamweaver. So the place where we have to add the image is to this section here. So if I select on it, it will give us, it will indicate where it is within our line of code. We just need to basically add to this. So from here, I'm going to write a line of code, image, img, and we're going to define a source. So src equals, and quotation marks. And if we refer to this little helper here, Dreamweaver will help us to finish the line of code. So we can browse for the folder or the file, and I've saved it as horses.jpg, click open, and there it is. It's been placed in the right location, but we also have to add some alt text to it. So I'll add a space, alt, and equals, quotation marks, and we'll just call it 2 horses. There we go, and that's section or step number 11. The final step, step number 12, asks you to link the buttons on both the home page and the gallery page so that they all work correctly. Save the gallery page. So to do that, we'll start off at the gallery.html page, and we're just referring to these two lines of text here, and we're going to convert those into links. So just highlighting the gallery text, which we'll also do so down here in the code view. We can add a link in the properties palette by selecting this browse file tab, and then we're going to go to contents, gallery.html, and click open. As you can see, Dreamweaver's done some of the heavy lifting by adding the line of code to our gallery link here. So we'll do the same to our home. If we highlight this line of text, and it does so within our code view, we can go to link, go to browse for file, and we need to go back one step to the index.html page, and that will add a separate link. And if you roll over them in live view, you can see that they're both working and accessible. So we need to go up to File, Save All, and then do the same thing for index.html. So if we go back here, just highlight this line of code here, this word here, home. Highlighting that, we'll do so within our code view as well. We just got to get access to our properties palette. So if I highlight it, there we go. We got the link, browse for file, and we just go to index, which is our home, click open, and then we highlight the gallery text, and it's done so in our code view. Go down to properties, link, hit the browse for file tab, and now we're going to head into gallery.html and open. And there's our two working links. So we go up to file and just make sure that we save all, because that is the final step for the website in section C. Now we can proceed on to section C, the animation. So the second part is the animation demonstration. So this is where it starts in the actual exam. So this gives you some instructions that you need to follow and just a list of assets that will be contained within the Adobe Animate file. Also worth taking note of this little section here, that the folder yara2.psd assets is not used in the animation task and should not be modified. So note that the frame rate is set to 30 frames per second. So just keep that in mind. So as you scan forward, it will give you a concept guide, it will give you some visuals to work with, just like the web section. It's got a few details here that we might refer to a little bit later, and these are the steps that we're going to refer to. So the very first step is to open the Flash Animate file walking tours _start.fla and change the stage color to that hexadecimal code, and that will get you 1 mark. So if we close this and head to our resources folder or assets folder, we'll double click on the walking tour starts, and I'm going to be using Adobe Animate CC for this particular tutorial. So before we do get started, when you open up the program, it's worth just observing some of these palettes and where they're located from the timeline. Also the properties palette and the library palette. All of these palettes will be extremely useful, and if you can't find them or don't have them on your screen for whatever reason, you can head up to the top and just find the palettes that you need within this window section here. So the very first step asks us to change the stage color, and to do that we just head over to properties. And just without anything clicked on the screen, you'll be able to get access to this section here. It says properties. We can change the frames per second, but the stage color is the one that we need to change. So we're going to change this white, and we can click on this code here, and we can insert or type in the code that they require. So 3, 3, and 4S. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that gives us a light sky blue color. So that's step 1. Step 2 says, from the Flash library, add the movie clip Sun to the stage, placing it in the correct layer order. So this is where we go over to our library palette. We just observe the assets or the movie clips and even sound files that they've provided you. Just remember, we're not allowed to touch the contents inside this folder, so we're going to leave that one alone. But in this instance, what we're going to do is use this Sun layer or movie clip. So before we move it onto our canvas and start animating it, we're going to start a new layer, and we'll call this one Sun. And then we can get this Sun movie clip and then drag it onto our stage. And you can see how it's in our foreground. It's in front of the cityscape, But if we observe the concept guide, you'll also see that it's actually should be placed behind the cityscape. It sort of creeps up from behind the buildings. And so to do that on our animation, I'll head back to Adobe Animate. I'm just going to drag and drop that sun under the Yarra layer, and that sort of tucks it behind the cityscape. So that's where you can just be careful when sort of clicking on your stage, making sure that you don't pick up the wrong layer. I'll just undo that. And what you can do is just lock the Yarra layer, so now I can't move it, and now I can easily pick up the sun and get it into its right location. But that's step 2. It just asks you to place it in the correct layer order. Step 3 asks you to animate the sun so it rises over 5 seconds as per the sample animation and the concept guide. So we'll head back to our concept guide, and you'll see that it starts from here at 0 seconds. It's behind the cityscape in its entirety. You don't see the sun at all. And then after 5 seconds, it rises up so you can almost see the entire sun movie clip. So we'll head back to Adobe Animate. Now, at the moment, we've got it set at frame number 1 or keyframe number 1. And with that sun layer, we want to get that into the position that we want to start it in. So what we want to do, if I hold down Shift and just move it up and down, you can sort of get it into its position where then it will rise up above the cityscape to about there. So we just got to make sure that you're following the concept guide as accurately as possible. So point A will be here, or keyframe 1, and over 5 seconds, so that with 30 frames per second, that makes it 150 frames. I can just scan down here, right click and say insert keyframe, and I'll take Yarra with me as well. So at keyframe number at 150, we are going to move it up, holding down Shift so it stays straight to about there, just making sure once again it matches up with the concept guide, which it does. I'm pretty happy with that. I'll minimize that. And so those 2 points, if I just scrub over the timeline, you can sort of see it's going from point A to point B. And if we right click between the 2 keyframes and say create classic tween, you can now see it animating over 5 seconds. So that's step 3. Step 4 asks you to animate the brightness of the Yarra layer from -75% to the original brightness over 5 seconds so that the city changes color with the rising of the sun as per the animation demonstration and the concept guide. So once again, if we head back to the concept guide, you can see from keyframe 1 or frame 1, it's starting off as like a dark cityscape, and it brightens up over time. So we've got to basically emulate that. So to do that, you've got to just make sure that we're in the Yarra layer, and I'll just unlock that. Just selecting that, and I'll select keyframe number 1. Now to change the brightness and other sort of color effects, you can select the layer at keyframe 1 and go up to color effect, style, and we've got a list of color effects that we can apply, one being brightness, and we just dial that down to -75 as required. So at -75, it needs to brighten up over time. So keyframe 1, we'll leave it there. But if we scan over to the keyframe at frame 150, we'll repeat. But we'll just make sure that the brightness is set to 0. So it just goes back to basically normal. So and then if we right click on that and select create classic tween, you can see the brightness of that particular layer increase over time. So that's step 4. Step 5 says to insert the movie clip text 1 at 2 seconds at a drop shadow of 8 pixels distance and 75% strength. So to do that, we've got to scrub back on our timeline, and we're going to add a new layer. So to separate it from the other 2, of course, and we'll double click on this and just give it an appropriate title. I'll just call it text 1. And before we move it into our stage from the library palette, we'll just we'll add a keyframe at 2 seconds, because this is essentially where it's going to start animating. That's where it's going to be presented on the canvas. So we'll select keyframe or frame 60, right click, insert keyframe, and we'll go over to the library palette, and the movie clip that they want you to place is this one here called text 1. So we'll drop that onto the stage, and that will place it onto that layer at keyframe number 60, at frame 60. So we'll just place it there for now. We'll just get it generally in the right position. To add some additional effects to it, we'll just make sure that it's selected at that keyframe, go up to properties, and we're going to add a drop shadow effect. To do that, you just go to add filter in the filters panel, and there is a drop shadow effect that we can apply, and in the properties palette you might need to just drop that down to give us more options, and you can see some additional options that we can apply. So it requires a drop shadow of 8 pixels distance, so distance is here, we just change it from 4 to 8, and then a distance and 75% strength. So we go over to strength, which is 100, and turn that down to 75%. And so that's the step 5, inserting the text 1 and adding a drop shadow effect. Step number 6 asks you to animate the text so that it appears to fade in and move from the background to the foreground over 3 seconds, as shown in the animation demonstration and concept guide. So once again, we'll refer back to these details here. We've got to punch in these details for the X and Y, and the width and height from the start to the end. There's also some transparency changes that we need to be aware of. So to do that, we go back to our Adobe Animate, and we need to get the text layer, selecting keyframe number 60, or at frame number 60, start at that starting keyframe, so point A, and the start position. To define that, we need to just select the layer, head over to our properties palette, and look for this option here, position and size. I'm just going to make sure that this lock is unlocked, so then we can punch in the exact figures without it sort of constraining to proportions. So the X for start position is 332, Y is 171, the width is 107 by 36.5. So just make sure that these details are as exact as possible. Just wiggled around a little bit. That's a little bit better. 107 by 365, perfect. All right, so that's got to animate over 3 seconds. So if we move ahead, we can go 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and add another keyframe here. So right click, insert keyframe. Not frame, right click, insert keyframe. There we go, and that will be our last or final position, point B. So now if we select the text, we can punch in some different details here. So X is 300, Y is 195, width is 365, and the height is 195. So there, once again, it's wiggled around a little bit, but I'm just going to make sure that that is exactly what is required. So there we go. And if we now right click in between just to test that, we'll go insert or create classic tween. You can see the animation or the text animate from point A to point B. So it also asks you to change the transparency from 30%, which is here. So we'll do that. We'll select it. And we can add a style effect here, which is alpha, and alpha affects the transparency of that particular symbol. And this needs to start from 30 from point A. It's going to fade into 100 at point B. So we just got to click on it, color effect, alpha, bump that up to 100%, and we'll just test that by scrubbing over it. So that is step number 6. Step number 7 is a challenging one, where we've got to add the possum symbol and use a motion guide to make a jump twice on the fence from the right to the left and exit on the 3rd jump. We've also got to resize the movie clip and add a squash at the bottom of each jump and stretches at the top of each jump. So to begin with, we're going to create a motion guide for this one. So to do that, we're going to start a brand new layer. Now there's a few ways that you can approach this though, but this is my way. So I'm going to create a motion guide. And this animation, as mentioned in the concept guide, needs to start at 3 seconds and it moves across to 6 seconds. So if we go back to Adobe Animate, we'll start at 3 seconds and insert a keyframe there. And then we'll create a new layer, and this one is going to be for our possum. So I'll just move that underneath it for now. And that starts at 3 seconds as well. So insert keyframe. So there's nothing in there at the moment though, but we'll start with our motion guide. So we can use the pen tool to create a motion guide, or a path at least, for which the possum will animate across. And so we've got to make sure that we're referring back to this motion guide here and just making sure that you're adhering to this. You could also use a motion tweening, but I'm referring to this this statement, or these words here, motion guide. So this is my interpretation of it at least. So I'm going to go over to the pen tool, and this is how I'm going to draw my motion guide. I'm just going to go up to properties, and just making sure that in this instance here, I'm just using a stroke color. It doesn't matter what color, but it's just one that's easy to see. And I'm just keeping the stroke not too heavy or not too thick. So just the 2 points. So at keyframe, or at frame number 90, making sure that you got the motion guide layer selected, I'm going to click here, which is our starting point. Just give it a bit of an arc by holding down the mouse button and then just clicking once here. That's our first bounce. Our second bounce maybe a bit higher. Just making sure that the path doesn't cross over, because that can cause some issues. And the second bounce will be about here. I'm going to repeat the process, maybe a little bit higher again, making sure that the path doesn't cross over, and then we can bounce off the screen. Now, if you need to manipulate this path, you can do so by using the direct selection tool, or the sub-selection tool, I should say. If I select this, just click off it, and then grab hold of these anchor points. You can actually manipulate the path here. I'm not going to be too fussy on it for now though, but that should do it. You can also use the tools underneath the pen tool, such as convert anchor point tool. You can actually go back and actually grab hold of these anchor points and these handles just to manipulate the path once again. So that's our guide. Now we're going to select the possum layer, and we're going to go up to library. We're going to bring in the possum movie clip. So just got to make sure that we got the right one of the two. So this is the one that we want. We're going to bring that onto our stage at keyframe, or frame number 90. So before we get started, make it a little bit easier for us to work with, it also asks us to resize the movie clip to a width of 50 by 30 in its first keyframe, and a width of 315 to a height of 230 in its last keyframe, so at 6 seconds. So here, the possum at keyframe, at point A, we'll go up to properties, just select the possum, and we'll adjust the width here. So the width is 50 by 30, and that makes it nice and small, a bit easier for us to work with. And then I'm just going to click Command plus to move in, and I'll get it started at the beginning of the motion guide. So I'm going to just move it into place, and if you select this tool here, you can actually find the rotation point, the pivot point. You can get that into place. So it needs to be smack bang in the middle. So to now tie that in, or link that with our motion guide, what we're going to do first of all is right click on this motion guide and turn it into a guide. And so if we were to preview this or render it out, that motion guide would not be seen at all. So now we can get this possum movie clip, and you can actually click to drag it, move it into place, but we can also indent it here, and that will enable us to link it in with our motion guide. So to test this out, what we're going to do, we'll get the keyframes in their right position. So it's going to be from 3 seconds to 6 seconds. So the animation will extend out to here. So I'm going to select all these frames here, including the arrow and the sun, right click, and I'm going to insert frames just to get them all to catch up. And at this point here, a keyframe, or frame number 180 at 6 seconds, insert keyframe. Now, as long as these paths don't cross and it's drawn correctly, we should be able to move this into place over the other side. I'll just scan down so it's a bit easier to see. And if we keep that pivot point in the middle, at the next keyframe, right click and create classic tween, you can see if done correctly, it will follow the path all the way around to 6 seconds. So the next step will be to resize the movie clips. So what we'll do at this point, it's going to be animated to a width 315 by 230. So we can select this movie clip and we'll head it over to the position and size, and we'll go a width of 315 by a height of 230. That makes it much bigger. Now, it's really important to note that because the movie clip has scaled up, the center pivot point has now been moved away from the motion guide. So you just got to make sure that that is resting on the motion guide, so it sort of attaches itself to it. So then if we go back, we can see that the possum sort of animates over time, and it resizes in accordance to this these instructions here. So the last thing that it needs to include to finish step 7 is to add a squash and stretch. And so to do that, everyone will have their own techniques here though, but one thing I like to do is to add some additional keyframes just to keep it in its natural state. So maybe at its peak of each of these jumps, I'll go insert keyframe. Nothing really happens at the moment, but up at this peak I might add another keyframe, insert keyframe, and I'll do one more here. So this is where it's going to stretch out to its sort of natural state, but when it bounces it will squash. So insert keyframe. Now if I go back to the bounces, maybe even from the very beginning here, what I can do now is select it, and I'll just zoom in so it's a bit easier to see. So I'm going to select this, and just with our free transform tool, I'm going to grab these handles, hold down Alt on the keyboard as well, and that keeps it sort of grounded. And so just be careful with this, because once again it's detaching from the motion guide, so just keep scrubbing over and just making sure that it's doing what it's meant to. And so we get to this point here, the next bounce, where it sort of moves up to the next next peak. I'll insert keyframe here, grab these handles, just move this over a bit, hold down Alt, and create that squash, or as it impacts on the ground. So once again we'll just test that, zoom out, so squashing, bouncing, moving to the next one, and then as soon as it makes impact here, we'll insert another keyframe, add another squash, and there we go. So just keep scrubbing over the timeline just to make sure that it hasn't detached from the motion guide and it's still doing what it's required to do, and you can sort of see it sort of stretching back out and then moving towards the center of, or heading off the stage. Just have a look at that one more time. 1, 2, 3, and off the stage. So that's step 7. So step 8 asks you to add the movie clip Possum 2 at 6 seconds, so that it moves up from below the right of the screen over 1 second as shown in the sample animation concept guide. So we'll refer back to this, and we're looking at this section here for Possum 2. So just got to make sure that we get it in position and it animates over 1 second, so it's moving up onto the stage. So to do that, we'll go back to Adobe Animate, and just to make this a little bit easier to work with, I'm just going to hide some of these layers, including the motion guide. Start a new layer. Just make sure it's out of the motion guide, or that it's just moved up and it's on its own sort of layer, not indented. We'll call this Possum 2. And so that's where we'll insert or add Possum 2. But before we do, we just want to make sure that it is in its right position. So it's going to animate over 1 second. So from 6 seconds to 7 seconds. What we can do is just add frames right across here. So right clicking here, insert frames, and that gets everything sort of caught up, and we've got a second's worth of animation to play with. So Possum 2 starts here. So if we insert keyframe here at frame 180, we can then get the Possum 2, get it in position. So this will be the starting point, so it's under here, and it's going to move up the stage to, let's just see on the concept guide, to about here. It's also got a bit of a tilt to it, it looks like. So I might even try to emulate that as well. To do that, I'll just go to the Freeze Transform tool, select that. If you rest the mouse just outside of the container, you can actually just rotate it slightly and just get that once again in the position, and just making sure that it's reflecting exactly what's mentioned there on the concept guide. So that looks a little bit better. So over 1 second, it's going to start from here. So we'll get that into position just outside of frame, and for 1 second's worth of animation, I'm just going to right click, insert keyframe, and move that into positioning there. Right click in between and add a classic tween. That will move it in its position there. And that's step 9. Asks you to edit the movie clip Possum 2 and add and sync the audio file Find Your Feet at the point where the possum speaks. So to do that, we're just got to go into the possum movie clip, and we can do so by double clicking on it. And this gives us the actual animation playing within the movie clip. So what we can do to add sound is to add a new layer, and it doesn't necessarily matter where it lies or what position the layer is in, but we can call this sound. And what we're going to do is add a keyframe to maybe where it starts moving its mouth by adding insert keyframe, and we are just going to drag and drop Find Your Feet onto the timeline. So to preview that, what we can do is hit enter.
Find your feet.
And that's not too bad, but what you can actually do is just move this keyframe in position and just keep sort of tinkering with this and moving it until it syncs up with the movements of the mouth.
Find your feet.
Pretty happy with that. And that's step 9. And step 10 asks you to use a script typeface that's similar to the walking test and add text Find Your Feet at keyframe 215. So if we go back to scene 1, we've got to look for keyframe 215. Just move that up. And right here is where we want to add it. So what we'll do is we'll add a new layer. We'll call this walking text. Just move that into the foreground. And I'm just going to add frames to the entire animation. So insert frames and a keyframe 215. We're going to add a keyframe. So the quickest way to do this is to use some of the information that's already provided, or at least some of the styles that are already provided. So if we go double click on text number 1, we can double click on walking. We can copy that, head back to scene 1, and in our new layer and at this keyframe, I'm just going to head over to the type tool or text tool, click once just anywhere for now, and paste that text. So now we've got the same brush script and even same color, so it matches the walking. So it asks us to write find your feet. And also, now if we push it in position and try to match it up with this style guide here, you notice that it's slightly smaller. It's in line with walking, but it's perhaps slightly smaller, so it fits underneath the Melbourne a little bit better. So I've head back to Adobe Animate, double click on this, and you can just use the properties to try to match up the style guide. So here I can just bump that down maybe to about 57 points. That will do for now. Line it up with walking, just making sure that it can fit in. The other thing too, we need to add a drop shadow effect. To do that, just select that, head over to drop shadow and match up with the same strength, which was 75, and the distance at 8 pixels. And that gives us the same sort of drop shadow effect. And the last thing that we need to do to it is to end at 10 seconds. So it starts at 215, frame 215, and ends at 10 seconds. So head back to Adobe Animate. We highlight the 10 seconds or 300th frame across the board, right click and insert keyframe. So that will finish right on 10 seconds. So the last thing that we need to do is just to preview this and just to iron out any creases and just making sure that it's sort of looking the way that it should. So to preview the animation, you can hit Command Enter on the keyboard. That will enable you to preview the animation from start to finish, including sounds, and it doesn't have the motion guides, which is good. If you're happy with that, then you can proceed on to step number 7, which is export the finished file and add to the banner area of the website. So to export this, there's a number of ways that we can export, but I feel like the best way and perhaps the most appropriate way for web, or in this instance, is to export the movie, and you're going to save the file format as an SWF and give it an appropriate title as well. So walking tours, perhaps final. That's what I've done previously. So walking tours final, save in the appropriate folder that you're working in. Then head over to Dreamweaver for the final step. I'm going into index.html. And I'm just looking for the div container or the div ID animation. This is where we're going to place our SWF file. To easily do that, we can just click on the code in here, and we can head over to Insert HTML and scan down to the point that we see an flash SWF. If we click on this button, we should be able to then scan through our files, look for the walking tours final.swf and click open. You can give that a title, animation, and click OK. Now it says up here that the content on this page requires a new version of Adobe Flash Player. Now hopefully you might have one installed already on your computer, which I do. So if I go up to then real-time preview, Google Chrome, I'll click save to save. And then hopefully your web page will preview just like mine. I'll have the animation playing up in the banner, and I'll obviously have the remaining pages and the links sort of all styled and working correctly. So that's the 2017 VET exam. That's my sort of approach to it. There might be there's multiple approaches to perhaps some of these steps, but nonetheless, hopefully this has sort of helped and will assist you in your study for the next exam at the end of the year. So good luck with it all. Have fun with it, and thank you for tuning in. Bye.